we've taken on so many different hats over here. And so I am doing the mental health coordination, which this year, though, I've had a little bit of extra help. We've hired social workers in our district, and we hired a few more social workers in our district, which has been immensely helpful. It's been great. So we don't get to collaborate quite as often as we want to because there's just so much to do. And I think with COVID, it's been huge. That's been very helpful, but I'm doing that and then the TIP administration. And it seems, we've grown. We started out as one unit at Craig, and now we're on we're on 4 different campuses. So, which is great. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm just going to jump right into. I'm going to talk a little bit about just what we see in AISD, and then talk about the TIP program, and also kind of talk about this other supports a little bit that kind of go hand in hand with TIP or complement TIP, just so you kind of have a well-rounded idea of what we have here in AISD and kind of our vision of where we're going to add supports for students. I think we need them more than ever, especially with COVID. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully I'll do it correctly. Rebel, let me know if it's not showing up.
Will do. And guys, while she's pulling that up, remember to put your questions in the chat box, and then she may have a time for live questions as well, but that way you don't forget.
Let's see, slideshow, and from beginning, here we go. Okay.
There you go, we got it.
Awesome, okay. So I started off with this just because this is from Ruby Payne's Emotional Poverty book. And if you haven't read that book or picked up that book or seen Ruby Payne, I would suggest going to see her if you ever can, or just picking up that book. It's an amazing book, but emotion is processed 200 to 5,000 times faster than thought. And I think with so many of our kids who are in foster care or have been through trauma, that is so true. And many of our campuses are looking for trauma-informed care training. I know I was contacted by one campus yesterday who was looking to do a book study with all their teachers on trauma-informed care. And so that really benefits all of our kids when teachers have that kind of background, because all of our kids really respond so much more emotionally than they do with thought. They just don't have that ability sometimes. And this is probably information that you all are very familiar with, that this is from a 2000 report, and probably if we're looking at statistics today, this is, I'm sure with COVID even, these numbers are much larger. So even in 2019, if you look down there, the CDC reported that 13.6% of children between 5 and 17 had received treatment for mental health disorders within the past 12 months. That's the ones that actually have received treatment. We know that there are so many other kids out there that just haven't received treatment. They are in the gaps out there. And a lot of those kids we see going in the system, they're maybe receiving it and then they get transferred to different places. So it's not consistent. It's kind of all over the place out there. So one thing we do know is that when they are, the CASAs, I think, play a huge role. And I've seen so many of our kids that CASA is that one adult that kind of sticks through with them, and they're that support, and that one adult, makes a huge difference for kids. So what does it look like in the classroom? Lots of times we see those explicit signs, we see those mood swings, the inability to concentrate. The teachers are seeing forgetfulness and anger and irritability. You can look down through those symptoms of possible mental health issues. And those ambiguous signs are what we call those internal things that you don't see so much of. And when we're training teachers, we're teaching them to look out for those symptoms of possible issues. And not to take just such a punitive approach to everything, but to really get to the bottom of what's going on. And that's kind of leading to, and I'm going to get to RTI, But that kind of helps us, we not identify just academic issues, but also behavioral or mental health issues in our system. These are a lot of the disorders we see in the classroom and in the district. Lots of mood disorders, ADHD, anxiety. Some of these are diagnosed, and some of these, what's hard is you see kids, especially that come in the system and they've been diagnosed over and over by different people with different things. So sometimes the diagnosis is very helpful, just to give us a guideline of maybe how to approach a student, but not necessarily, and I always guard people, don't just label a student, but really look at the whole child, and let's see how we can best approach the student based on what we know, because sometimes we'll get many different diagnoses depending on who they've seen. And some are more true than others, and some are affected by age and that kind of thing too. But a lot of the unaddressed trauma is what we see as well. So I said I was going to talk a little bit about response to intervention. This is what drives all of our decision-making in the district. And this is something we've been revising and looking at every year of how to better address the needs of kids in our district. So we have kind of a flow chart in our RTI. If you ever hear RTI thrown around at meetings you go to, this response to intervention. So we've had it for academics for a long time. Behavior is a little bit newer in our conversations, but this kind of looks at that behavioral component. And it starts with that tier 1, how we address behavior for all students in our district. And that's the basic needs and the universal social emotional learning. How are kids in our district being addressed with social emotional learning? We've introduced CHAMPS to all the campuses, and the Leader in Me that we have in the elementary schools. So those are some of the universal kind of approaches we're taking with all students. Who implements that? Well, the teachers, the CHAMPS coaches, the counselors, all campus staff are responsible for that, even down to our custodians and our cafeteria workers. We want everybody to be involved with that culture, that school culture, and implementing those things. So when you walk through a school and you see, especially the elementaries have them up a lot, even the middle schools and the high schools, though, those CHAMPS kind of approaches to addressing kids. It's a way of speaking with kids, of implementing rules and expectations. Everybody kind of should have that approach. We have CHAMPS coaches, which are new this year, and they'll go in and work with an entire classroom. They'll work with the teacher to strengthen their CHAMPS approach. Teachers can ask for a CHAMPS coach to come in and say, I want assistance in implementing this, or I feel like I want some guidance. So that's one thing that AISD has put in place to assist teachers this year. So all students have that tier 1, but if they're not being successful in tier 1, we go to the next level, which says refer to the campus administration. So a student that's not responding just to that universal kind of response to discipline or expectations, the campus administration would look at that student and kind of decide if they feel more support is needed. And if so, we now have behavior liaisons on campuses. All our elementary schools, all our middle schools now have behavior liaisons. And those are campus-based persons that work with that next level of need for students. And at that point, that's a tier 2, and they start the RTI process for students at that level. So who's responsible for that? That would be the behavior liaisons, and also social workers can get involved at that point as well. And the behavior coordinators, and there are 4 of us in the district. Now we got in one more of the behavior coordinators, and they can help with tier 2. So at that point, that's where you start an actual plan for a student to, just like you would with academics. If they were struggling in academics, you actually start official meetings and plans for students. So it might be a small group pullout. It could look more like intensive interventions, a check-in and a check-out, maybe calming rooms where they could go and into the behavior liaisons room or work with that behavior liaison a little bit in the day. Mood monitoring, individual point sheets outside of maybe the teacher has a point system she uses for all the kids, but at this point we're going to use a specific one for that child and monitor it and collect data on it. That's the real important part, is we're collecting data to see how they respond to the interventions. So after you've collected that data and they're still not responding, then we move that child to tier 3. And that tier 3 is really focused on that individual student, even more so. And who is going to be responsible for that? That's where the behavior coordinators, the 4 of us, are really brought in to come in and work more intensely with that student. We have a district committee that we serve on. We meet weekly to put those children on the radar to kind of look and monitor a little more closely. We may look at it, doing our assessments, observations that may go over weeks. We may look at what plans have been put in place, point systems, charts, behavior contracts, whatever, and look to see if we can't maybe monitor them. If they've worked with the social worker, have what's been done there. We may work more closely with the social worker, the parents, guardians, whomever's on their team. We may take a more team approach at that point. Now, if a student is already under special education, we also bring in the special education team. Does that student have a behavior intervention plan already? Does that behavior intervention plan, do the teachers understand exactly how to implement it? If not, the LSSP may get involved to revise it or come in and assist to help with that implementation. We can assist with that implementation. It may need to be revised. If there's not a behavior intervention plan and we think that one is warranted, then we can request a functional behavior assessment by the special ed department. There's a lot of different things that can be done at tier 3 if the other tiers have not helped the student. And then at this point, after evaluation, we're constantly talking about these students, these tier 3 students in our committee meetings. And we can start to look at placements, and that's where we have the therapeutic program. We have some other options too. And we kind of look and see, has it reached a level to where a student might need an alternative setting within the district. And that is kind of our last resort. We don't like to move students from his or her home campuses. We only do that if every other option has been exhausted and it's deemed appropriate, because that's really removing to a more restrictive environment from a least restrictive environment. So we kind of really only do that when we need to. So that's kind of the RTI process in a nutshell. So if you hear that RTI thrown around, that's what we're talking about. And every year we've kind of looked to how we improve that, how we help teachers understand the process. And like I said, most are really familiar with academic, but behavior has been a little newer in the past years, gathering that information. The behavior supports coordinators, like I said, there are 4 of us. We each have our kind of specialty. I do the mental health coordination for the district. Marilyn Young does special education, and emotional disturbance is her specialty. She just recently completed her doctorate in that, and she has her degree in that. Christina Dooley is a specialist in autism spectrum disorders. And then Raymond Zamora, we brought him on this year. He does general behavior and also supervises behavior liaisons on the campuses. And we all kind of pull together. So we all have certain schools that we kind of work specifically with, but if I go over to say Ortiz and I'm looking at a student and I think this might be an emotional disturbance. This student, they may not have been identified for special education. I might bring Marilyn over to kind of say, hey, what do you think about this student? Or I think I see some possible autism in the student. I'll bring Christina over and say, hey, what are you seeing here? And we kind of collaborate that way. Same with mental health. They'll bring me over to kind of give some suggestions sometimes for that. So understanding the whole RTI process, one size doesn't fit all in the strategies or interventions. So we have lots of different things that we share as far as point sheets and approaches. That's one reason our district committee is, when we get together, we sometimes discuss, hey, I've got this student I've been assisting such and such campus with, I've been going to observe. Here's what we've been trying. And we'll kind of come together as a committee. That committee is made up of the 4 of us coordinators, and then our executive director of student services, our special education coordinator. We have an LSSP, that's the licensed specialist in school psychology, representative from there in that group. And so we all kind of come together and evaluate, what can we do to further maybe intervene with this child. And like I was saying, relationship with an adult is always key. So we always kind of look at what kind of outside resources does this child have? Do they have a mentor? Who's involved with this child? Sometimes it's been very helpful if we can find a mentor for a child, if they don't have anybody. And if they do have somebody, we always make sure we've talked to them and really involved a team approach. We always come back to the table if it's not working. Really key, before we move a student to any program, we have to give it time. And that's sometimes really hard. Campuses are struggling sometimes, and giving it time, because students on their home campuses, that's where they're friends. That's when kids especially moved around a whole lot. Sometimes removing them from a campus is just another change. And that may not be in the best interest. Sometimes it is the best interest to give them a smaller environment, but sometimes it's not. So we have to be very careful in making those decisions. And we always have to remind, sometimes it's really hard with behavior, the reset button, and giving kids a chance to reset, especially around the holidays, or lots of the kids in foster care, it's a very difficult time around the holidays, as you all know. So just that reset button. And fidelity and consistency are very integral in getting accurate data and making everything work for students. So that's just another kind of component I wanted to hit on. So I know I'm going kind of fast, but I really wanted to get into the programming. These are just kind of some of the foundations to the programming and how we get to placements. So the therapeutic program is the one that I administer. We have 4 programs on 3 campuses. We have programs that serve K through 12. So on Martinez Elementary's campus, we have a K-1-2 program and a 3, 4, and 5 program. Craig has a middle school program, and Abilene High has a high school program. And the therapeutic program really targets mental health. So we're looking at students who primarily have a mental health diagnosis. They're not primarily behavior, although with mental health, sometimes you're going to see some behaviors that are secondary. So the student, especially in the little ones, who maybe is going through grief or depression, they may exhibit behaviors, but they don't have the words to understand what they're feeling. So that's going to come out in a behavior. We don't usually service the ones that the behaviors are the primary issue, where they're so severe That is really, you can't get to anything else besides dealing with the behavior. For instance, if it's severe behavior where they're constantly maybe attacking other students or harming themselves, where you have to address the behavior before you can even get to the grief, or you can get to the sadness, or you can get to any of the mental health concerns or the trauma. There's another program that would deal with that first. But what we do is we're a continuum of services, and we work with outside providers. So if they have a counselor, if they have a therapist, if they have Betty Hardwick and family partners, skills, case management, we work with those people to bring in the coping strategies into the school, and we support that. So we don't do the counseling per se, but we support the counseling that's going on outside of the program. The student doesn't have counseling, we'll assist that family in locating counseling. The rooms are set up to be more sensory oriented, and you can kind of see a progression from elementary on up. If you go, these are pictures more from the high school setting, where the kids, and even the high school kids, love the stuffed animals. It's funny, although we've had to pull some of that back because of the COVID this year. But as they get up to the high school level, they know what the tools are, and they know what fidgets are for. They know what the sand's for, and they will come in and ask for it, not to use in a, just a play way, but they want it for actually to help calm down. They know what works for them. They weighted animals, if it's the sand, if it's one of the beaded bottles, they know what helps them calm down. If it's a beanbag, if it's a rocking chair, we have egg chairs that you can sit in. So they all kind of have their thing, but they know how to use them. And they can tell you what it's for. Middle school, they also have that ability to do that. Elementary, the teacher kind of is in that process of teaching how to use tools. So they're less out and available, because sometimes we see them be a distraction, but she teaches as they have that ability developmentally to utilize. And so when they are having moments of being overwhelmed, during need of those kind of things, that's where they learn those skills. So the rooms you can kind of see that progression into this. So as we go through, I'll kind of show you the different room aspects. These are light filters. We try to get rid of the glaring lights, and we'll put light filters on the room and use lamps wherever possible. There's some more of the weighted animals. Kids have drawn artwork. We use yoga balls. Like I said, we have alternative seating, especially in the high school. It's all over the place. The kids have all kind of, each have their preferences, definitely. We use bouncy bands, wobble seats in the elementary. We've got surfer chairs for kids that sometimes need to sit on the floor, but we want to give them something to write and a little more structure. We usually try to keep a scene that's kind of calm and cool, relaxing. The high school teacher puts on a fire in the winter to kind of make it warm and relaxing and cozy. But they'll have different scenes and some soft music playing. So the therapeutic program itself, it's very small. We usually have no more than 8 to 10 students that are scheduled into the classroom at one time. You may have more kids that use what we call the red card, and I'll get to the red card in just a second. But as far as actually being scheduled into the room, no more than 8 or 10, especially when you get into the elementary levels. We really try to keep it no more than 8, because they're doing a little more direct teaching in there. Secondary, middle school, and high school, they do computer programs. As far as the teaching, they will use Edgenuity and then get assistance if they need it from the paraprofessional or the teacher but the teacher and the para do more crisis intervention for the students that need to process when they're having a meltdown or they come in and they're upset. Elementary, they'll do a little more of the direct teaching. They work with the teachers in the regular classes, and they'll kind of take that work and work with them in the classroom. Right now, because we've incorporated Zoom, so the students will sometimes Zoom in to the actual classroom to help them with that transition. So they'll watch the classroom they're going to eventually transition back into. And so it's a less of a kind of a jolt when they actually transition. The placement is by our district committee. So if a kid gets to student makes it to tier 3 and we finally have exhausted all interventions, we will review that student in their district committee and make a recommendation for placement into the TIP program. And after that recommendation has been made, if it's a student who's already in special education, then that recommendation would go to the ARD committee. And that decision will actually be made to say yes or no in the ARD committee. And the parent or guardian would have the final say, of course. If the student is not a special ed student and the TIP committee makes a recommendation, and usually by that point, I've usually talked to the parent and just explained what the TIP program is, and I've garnered whether or not they're interested. And then once it goes to committee and we've approved that recommendation, I would call the parent or guardian and say, we do have a place for that student, and talk them through that process, and then talk to the campus, and we would set up a time for the student and the parent to come and tour and do an intake and everything like that. So it's a little less formal if they're not in special education. Special education, it has to go through ARD, and then we would go into the touring and all that kind of stuff. And they can always come and tour prior to the ARD or making a final decision as well if they need to come see it. I was trying to think what else. We really look at social skills, restorative practices. We're looking at addressing if there are academic deficits. We do want to address those so they have confidence, but our goal is to move the child from our TIP program back into their traditional classes and transition out into traditional classes, and then eventually move them back to their home campus. So that would be our goal as they are ready. And we really monitor progress that way. For the first 6 weeks, usually they're in the TIP room so we can get to know them, get to know where the goals that we need to set with them and monitor progress. And then after that, we really look at moving them out one class at a time. We usually start with math because that's the hardest one. We don't want them to get too far behind in math, but we'll usually start with a strength and then math and move them out that way. As they do start to transition out, I mentioned a red card. So we have a red card that we give students, and all the teachers on the campuses know what a red card is. This allows a student, if they are out into the traditional classroom, they are out in a class and they become overwhelmed or feel like they need to come back to the traditional classroom, they can come back and visit with the teacher or the para and work through whatever has happened. If it's they've gotten overwhelmed, maybe they're having just a really bad day, maybe they've gotten frustrated, or they've had an anger issue or something like that. Instead of just remaining in class and getting more frustrated, they can come back to the TIP room, talk with the teacher or the para, and then hopefully the goal is to get back to class, work through that, be reminded of a coping strategy, work through it, get back to class. We can also look and if it's, sometimes we've had kids, especially kids in the system, who they've had a really rough night the night before. They've had a tough time the night before. They don't know where they're going. Maybe they're moving to a new location. Those things can be quite upsetting. And sometimes when we know that's going on, we've been able to keep them in the TIP room just for that day, so they're in a little more comforted environment. and we can kind of help them instead of, going out to the regular classroom and just having meltdown after meltdown and just not making it through a day. We've been able to kind of give them that wraparound support that they need. There are just all kinds of ways we can use TIP and help them and teach them self-regulation that we want them to carry on with them through life. So that's kind of, we serve both general and special ed populations. Our goal is to give them skills that they will carry on with them even when they leave high school. We are a program, even if they transition out and say they're using a red card, but they're not really ready to go back to their campus and say they're in the 8th grade, we could always carry them over to Abilene High into that program for support. If they're in elementary and they need support in middle school, sometimes we'll choose to carry them over to Craig Middle School. We really individualize it for the student and the amount of need that they have. So they could continue to be a red card student just with that extra supportive TIP in the background. They could exit the program fully and return to their home campus and just have the behavior liaison or the counselor as a support on a regular campus. It kind of just depends on what that student's need is. But we really, really try to look at the whole child and the whole needs of that child. Let's see. If TIP is not the right placement, say they're at tier 3 and, we're kind of looking at other things. There are other options in the district, and I'll talk about another program here in a minute that some of you may be familiar with. But we always try to look at other supports, like I said, before we move them. The campus-based behavior liaisons I mentioned. Sometimes kids get to tier 2 and that's all they need. They do well at tier 2 with that support of the behavior liaison. They just need that behavior liaison to establish that relationship with. Sometimes they just need the social workers to establish that relationship with, and maybe their family needed that support. High school, they have the at-risk counselors. They have 2 of those, one at Abilene High and one at Cooper. And sometimes kids do find if they just have that, they're different from the regular counselors. They're the at-risk ones, and those at-risk counselors see those kids pretty frequently. And so they give a little more counseling assistance to the kids that really are a little more high need, and that's all those kids need. They don't need a placement necessarily. Although we have some kids who see the at-risk counselor and use a red card in our TIP program at Abilene High. So sometimes we kind of combine. We have our homeless liaisons in our district. Communities and Schools does great work as well with some of our kids. I mentioned our 4 coordinators that we have. And then the other program, though, if there's that tier 3 and everything has been exhausted and we're still looking at, okay, maybe this kid needs a placement. We're looking at if it's not mental health, if it's really more behavior and they need a structured setting that is addressing more of the behavioral side of things. That is the Student Achievement Program, and it's located on 5 different campuses. Cooper, Madison has a middle school unit. Woodson has a middle school unit, as well as a PALS unit. And then there's Austin Elementary and Bonham Elementary that have units. And they do more of the severe behavior. So we're going to talk about them in a minute, but real quickly, I wanted to talk about the behavior liaisons too. So I think we covered a lot of them. At the tier 2 level, the only other thing I wanted to say about them was that they can collaborate with special education. They can pretty much, this is one good thing I think that we used to have everybody wanting to move a kid off a campus and put them in a program. We've been able to keep a lot of kids on their home campus, which, like I said before, is really beneficial to many of the kids who move around a lot. Keeping them with their home campus in an environment where they're have been able to make some connections is really good. And these behavior liaisons have been wonderful to work with some of our kids. So they can collaborate with a lot of different people and establish that kind of rapport. So that's kept a lot of kids at tier 2. So the Student Achievement Program was the other program at the tier 3, and this is the behavior program. It is also a placement by district committee. It's also a small setting, but the difference between TIP and SAP is that SAP only serves the special education population. So a student has to be coded as special education. They have to have worked through all the RTI. TIP, you need to have worked through the RTI as well, but special education has to have gone through to be part of the SAP program. It's highly structured. They work on behavior modification and social skills. They don't provide the counseling, but that just like TIP, they will support it and work with outside partners as well. So that's kind of the difference between those two programs. TIP will serve general ed or special ed, either one. This one serves only the special ed population. So they have to have gotten that eligibility. They really work mainly with the emotionally disturbed children. Sometimes autism with severe behaviors will fall into that category as well. And they do have some really talented teachers that work with these kids and have years of working with these students. We both work with the autism side of things. So if there are some kids who are on that spectrum and they've, aren't able to function on the campus, and they've made it all the way up through that tier 3 level, I would say the difference between the two is we really, autism covers such a broad spectrum. It never looks the same. I think the difference we're looking at is with TIP, it's usually we're seeing the students that maybe have the more sensory, they really can't handle going to the cafeteria. They really need that more quiet environment. They do need some structure, of course, but they've got a lot more sensory issues that are getting in the way, or emotional kind of things. Whereas SAP will be dealing with possibly more intermittent explosive disorders, anger, that kind of thing that may be causing aggression. They deal with the more aggressive side of things over there. So those are the two programs. And they do transition out. Their goal is to transition out as well. They have a 7-step process that's pretty rigid. You have to make it through a certain number of steps before you transition out. And we kind of look at the individual student in TIP and their progress based on their personal goals and coping strategies instead of a 7-step process. So that's a little different as well. This is kind of our saying in TIP. What is fair? Fair is not everyone getting the same thing. Fair is everyone getting what they need. And we kind of look at that in TIP as our little mantra. We really want to look at, and we teach the kids this too. This person over here may be, getting this because this is what they need on their journey. This is what this person needs right now. And our kids honestly are pretty good about, especially as they get up in the secondary level, at recognizing that everybody's on a journey. Everybody is there for some purpose, and they're pretty supportive of each other. It becomes like a small family. Sometimes they have quibbles, but they are very supportive of each other, which is really nice to see sometimes. And I think that's what makes TIP kind of special, that the kids all know they're in there for the same reason, and maybe not the exact same reason, but they're all there to improve on something or work on something, and they're very supportive. Our teachers are really great. We have the teacher at Abilene High is She's been doing it for an extremely long time. She started with the program and has just trained and is very, very big on conscious discipline and trauma-informed care. She's trained in TBRI, the trust-based relational, I can't think what it's called right now, trust-based TBRI. I'm having one of the senior moments today. And I know Rebel's going to know it as soon as I get off of here because I'm just like blanking on it.
Relational intervention.
Isn't it relational intervention? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't think of the I. But she's trained in that. Our middle school teacher is, I stole her from Betty Hardwick. She used to be the S waiver coordinator, and she actually still works nights over on the crisis, the mental health side over there, Gina Jones, and she is phenomenal. Her history, just her own history, she relates to the kids brilliantly. We have at the elementary level, one of our teachers used to work on the behavioral side of things, our tiny tippers, as we call them. She's just phenomenal with those little tiny tippers, and her pair is amazing. They've just got it down. And then our middle tipper is a licensed professional counselor. And although she doesn't counsel them, she has that whole background and mindset to be able to work with those kids. And she's phenomenal with academics too. So she's just a double whammy. So, but we see a need, and I think, at the secondary level, we have just in both of those rooms each, we have, I think, over 20 something kids that use the red card and just come and go during the day to check in. That's at the middle school and high school in each of those rooms. I think it's over 20 now at each of those. And they just come and go and check in sometimes. Sometimes they're coming in because they really need something. But it's made a difference for a lot of those. We've had one student at the high school level who just graduated. He finished all his high school credits, and he will graduate this year. He technically would be graduating in December, but he's one that would have probably dropped out. And we had a couple like that last year that I know would have probably, one worked with CASA last year, and she earned her degree, and I don't think she would have gotten it had she not worked with Lori so closely, and her CASA was a huge help. So
great. Well, we do have some questions in our chat box, Susan. Yes. We'll kind of look through those real quick, and then one of them was, the first question was from Shanna Barron. She said, what are some unaddressed traumas, and how do we know what to look for? So
unaddressed traumas are, I think, those are the things that we don't even know. I mean, it can be anything from, we've had kids that we didn't know their whole story when we've gotten them. We knew why maybe they had been removed, but as we dug deeper, there was so much more to it. And so I think what we do when we talk about the unaddressed traumas, that when we're dealing with when we're talking to teachers that are going to have these kids, being aware that you don't know their whole story, that the way you approach them and approach any kid, you need to be aware of your words and just how you're approaching any situation. It's just a way you approach that trauma-informed classroom approach.
And Shanna, some of the trauma we'll know about if there are cases, but we might be treating them because there was drug and alcohol abuse in the home. But then as we go through the case, we find out that because of that, that opened up the door to sexual abuse or physical abuse or something like that. So it can be constantly evolving. And as Susan said, there's layers to it, and they might find layers out as we go through that.
We even had one, we've had students that witnessed a suicide, but on top of that, they've had other deaths on top of that. So those other traumas that are underneath that they never got the grieving process finished. So that's exacerbated. So that's a kind of an underdressed trauma that's underneath that.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
The next question was, and you hit this, but I'm not sure if we were able to catch it. What campuses are the tip rooms currently on?
So Martinez has two. They have our elementary, they're K1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5. And Craig has the middle school, and Abilene High has the high school.
Okay, and so my question to piggyback on hers is that it's a two-part question, that a committee decides the placement, a district-wide committee decides kids that will be placed in this program. So if you identify a child or a student that needs to be in this program, but it's on a different campus, how is it integrated?
So we had this just this morning. We had a student that was on one campus, and we had made the recommendation committee that we would recommend the student for placement. We went to ARD this morning. And between all of that, I had met with her Betty Hardwick, case manager and counselor, and my tip teacher. We all met together, kind of talked about a plan that we wanted to put in place for this child. We took that to the ARD committee. And so in committee this morning, we presented that plan, how we would bring her over. We provide transportation. District provides the transportation. So if the parent doesn't want to bring them, we provide that. And we talked about this is how we would like to bring her over. We're starting her with a shortened schedule because of her anxiety, and we'll increase that time. Sometimes we just bring them on over, and we will start them out for the first 6 weeks in our tip room to get to know them.
Okay,
That's
so if
kinda
a
how we-
child's identified and they need the services, they might be getting transported over to a different campus for that time.
Yes, yes. So, and usually they're in the program for at least, I would say 6 months would be the very shortest we would have them. I would say at least half a year, probably the full year, depending. And then we would look, do they want to go back to their home campus? You know, how do we want that to look? Half days, we could do a half day, and half day tip, half day of regular campus.
All right, good. Leanne asked, are there additional family supports offered in this approach?
So sometimes we're looking at a student and we're like, they really need some parenting in that family. Lots of times at the tier 2 level, they've already worked with the social worker, and the social worker's already addressed that with the family. If not, if they come to us and they have no services at that point, and we're looking at, do they need Methodist family, Presbyterian children's, do they need home services? We can kind of look at that or is it a Betty Hardwick? We look at that and we recommend, services. Part of the TIP program that we really want that child to be in counseling. And so we have a ton of free resources we recommend. The part of our program to be in the program, we want them in services. And we talk to the parent or guardian. This is how we see the best effort and the best product come out of this is that the child has counseling. We're not going to be able to fix everything. So we need that. And so we'll work with them on that.
And I know, and we're going to hear about this program in 2021, but the other program with Tina Fleet, which is more engaging the families.
Yes.
And so it's a different program with different goals and that type thing. And
yes. And sometimes, like I said, in tier 2, they will have caught some of the kids that maybe need to be part of that, or they will have already engaged them in some of those things, but the child still needs more support. So they may already have services set up. And so that's how we all kind of collaborate together.
Good. Now, someone asked if it's at Cooper. We've already addressed that. But then another question was, is the goal to offer it on more campuses in the future?
We hope so. Now, Cooper does have the high school SAP program right now. They have the behavioral unit. We had thought possibly they would get a therapeutic unit this year, but they were like, well, we're getting the behavior unit for the first time. So I think they wanted to get the behavior unit over there and get it started before we even looked at, and I don't know with budget and everything with COVID, I don't know eventually I hope we'll move that direction.
Good. Okay. What do the social workers do? What is their role?
So their role really, they work with the families. They work to get, they step in at tier 2 and they work with basic needs of families, clothing, housing. But they also will work with the families as far as this and the student. If the student is having behavioral issues, a lot of those things can stem from the lack of the things in the home. So they'll kind of look at that whole picture and see what's needed at that tier 2 level and step in and see, gee, is there a lack of basic needs in the home, or do they need counseling services? So sometimes that's why I said at tier 2, that might actually get resolved as far as the services that are needed. But the child still may be struggling. And so if they've already gotten services, they'll carry on. And the social worker will sometimes, we ask sometimes that because they have such a good relationship to kind of carry over into the first little bit of tip. And then sometimes they'll back off.
And
sometimes
hear
they'll carry
a little
on.
more about their role too when we hear from Tina and her team.
Yes.
That's where Sarah Reeling went, is to Tina Fleet's team. So
Yes.
So we
She's
had
awesome.
another question about, it's a 2-part question, is identifying children for the program. You said that's done by committee. But if there's a student that we wonder if they have been considered, or to see if they have been considered, this child in particular on one of our cases is 14 years old and they're doing the virtual campus. They're not in-person campus right now. So how are kids selected? How does the committee identify those kids? And what if we have a child that we're concerned about, we think might fit?
So it's hard. I know the virtual is making it really hard. So if they are virtual, we wouldn't place them in a program necessarily, because a lot of what happens is an in-person thing. And it's so much face-to-face as far as what we can do. But if they come back onto campus, it would be really kind of establishing if they ask if they've have behavior RTI. Have they started that? Where are they? If it's more that they don't have like behavior issues, they might start by talking to the counselor or looking at the campus social worker and talking to them about the concerns. So find out who the campus social worker is or the counselor and talk to them about the concerns. And number one, see where they are, if they do have behavior RTI, where they are in that RTI realm. And if they're not really having like behavior, like disciplinary issues or anything like that, talk to them about the mental health concerns, and maybe the social worker probably would be able to advise it. And I can come over and kind of look and just see what's going on too, because that would be the connection to the district committee.
Okay, they have a specific case that's kind of in crisis, and so I'll just have them email you direct.
Yes, yeah,
to
definitely.
Ask those questions.
Sure,
okay?
Absolutely.
I don't see other questions in here. Guys, do y'all have anything else that has not been asked? Feel free to speak up real quick. So while you're thinking, I did not say at the beginning, and normally I do, I am so proud of AISD. And this is a program that's not offered in many campuses across the state. I mean, really, Susan, do you normally just see this in some of the bigger school districts?
Yeah, and I usually try to attend a national conference that talks about all the different kinds of things that are going on across the nation, the different programming and that kind of stuff. And you do see it in different places. I haven't seen a whole lot of it around here. I'm seeing it more pop up in different places. I had somebody from Alabama actually I have no idea how she got my name, but she was starting something in Alabama. they made a new role for her. And so she was trying to set up stuff, and it was outside of Huntsville. And so she was trying to get something started. So I think she was starting something like this. But I think places like that are trying to take root, because I think there's a need for safe spots and, places that can work specifically and support teachers too. I think what's funny is when our middle school room, one of our assistant principals used to come over and get in the rocking chair when he'd had a particularly hard day. He'd just sit there. If you know Greg Rake, he would go over and sit and rock every once in a while on the chair.
I think we can all use that.
Yeah, somebody had said we need a teacher tip room over at Abilene High. They were like, we need a teacher tip room just where you can go and you decompress.
Well, I think this is wonderful that AISD is not just looking at what do the kids need academically, but they're looking at how can we look at the whole child that you talked about earlier and help this child overcome the hardships, get the full wraparound services and support from home and teachers and administration and advocates and everybody involved to give them the best chance at survival and at healing so that they can be the best that they can be. And I'm just so thankful for AISD having the vision to bring this about. And I know that you spearheaded so much of this and have gotten it out off the ground and running. And we are so appreciative, Susan, of your heart, and Katie, all of them over there that are involved in this. We appreciate each one of them. You guys are all amazing. Do we have any other questions, guys? Okay.
I'm here because my screen's over there.
I know. Well, I'm not in the office, so I'm not going to tell you what the door prizes will be today because I won't know until I get into the office. But Susan, will you pick a number between 1 and 20 for me?
Let's see, 16.
Kelly Taylor, you've won a door prize. And I will let you know what that is when I get in. And if you'll pick one more for me, Susan.
13.
All right, that is Miss Sally Shelton. Sally, you won a door prize, yay! So I'll notify you guys about what your door prizes are. And again, Susan, thank you so much for giving up your time. I know you're busy and you've got a lot of things going on. As I said, we're going to be kind of going in a similar direction, but a different program in the spring. We're going to have Tina Fleet talking to us about the student and family support services. And that's where we have 4 or 5 social workers that work on her team as well. So I think you guys are going to get a really good understanding of all the services available through AISD to help our kids just be the best that they can be and find the healing that they need so that they can be productive in the classroom. And if you have questions, Susan had put her contact information up there. Please be respectful of her time. But if you have a question that you need a direction on or need an answer on, reach out to her and she can point you in the right direction. Absolutely. So Susan, thank you so much again. You might throw that, if you have a second, you might throw that email up one more time.
Yes, and I've got Misty's up there too. Misty is our special ed, where's my screen thing here? Misty is our special ed coordinator, and she's probably way, way more busy than I am. I mean, honestly, so, but I know that she is over the SAP program, and she can probably offer, any insight into that as well. I'll be glad to, took my glasses off. Now I can't see. Okay. That awful. Let's see. Can y'all see it from there?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Take a screenshot, guys. Take a picture of it, whatever you need to do to have that information. We'll be sharing the links to this video again so that you can watch it again because it's so fast. You might have to go back and watch it again. But anything else, Susan?
I think that's it, but yes, feel free to contact me if you have any questions and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I never mind to take any questions from you guys because I really, y'all are, I mean, I love CASA and And y'all are so amazing at advocating and working with the kids. So
Well, thank you. And we miss you and hope to get you back.
I know, I can't wait to get back. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys. I'm going to shut it off now so you guys are free to go and we'll get your credit entered for this time. Again, this is our last event for 2020 and our next one will be in January and I'll email all the details out. So thank you and early Merry Christmas. Talk to y'all soon. Bye.